You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Wednesday, 12th of March 2014. Inside the UKIP Zoo, where staff regularly take their clothes off. Charles Kayonga in Britain, UK crime agency failed to act on arrest warrant for Rwandan general. Hip-hop jihadist who left £1 million London home to fight in Syria complains on Twitter of being kidnapped, tortured and robbed by fellow Islamists. Obama and Ukraine's democratically elected leaders. Spain to give $500 to immigrants to return home. 8 further jihadi arrests in France following jail of 4 on Monday. Moroccan woman gets 10 years in jail for killing her rapist. 42 African refugees drown off Yemeni coast. Maalula nuns freed in exchange for 150 rebels held prisoner. Thought for the day, mass immigration leaves towns and cities unrecognisable. And finally, garden snakes can be dangerous. UK news. Inside the UKIP Zoo, where staff regularly take their clothes off. UKIP's new London headquarters is a chaotic environment where workers are sex obsessed and volunteers frequently leave work early to go to the pub, it was claimed today. Former employees say that their office in Mayfair is often full of workers' pets, while staff regularly take their clothes off and compile lists of people they would like to have sex with. Nigel Farage's wife, who works as a secretary for UKIP, has reportedly described the office, which the party moved into last year as part of its push to become a major political force, as a freak show. The revelations about the bizarre atmosphere inside the headquarters were revealed after the Times spoke to a number of people who have worked in the building, which is located behind Claridge's Hotel. The office, which was lent to UKIP by wealthy backer Andrew Reid, is the centre of the party's push to beat the mainstream parties in this year's European elections and to win its first MPs in the general election of 2015. However, the insider accounts suggest that the new headquarters have failed to bring about a more professional approach, with one worker describing the atmosphere as carry-on politics, where staff are accustomed to ending work early and going to the pub instead. One employee said, "They're utterly chaotic. I was horrified by them. There's an element of the 70s golf club." Charles Kayonga in Britain, UK crime agency failed to act on arrest warrant for Rwandan general. The National Crime Agency, NCA, the newly founded police body dubbed Britain's FBI, stands accused of failing to act on an arrest warrant for a former Rwandan general wanted for crimes against humanity while he was in London receiving medical treatment. Lawyers acting for the victims of atrocities and war crimes alleged to have been committed by Charles Kayonga during Rwanda's 1994 genocide served a European arrest warrant, EAW, on the NCA via a Spanish judge in January after receiving information that he was in the capital to receive treatment for cancer. The NCA, which took over from the heavily criticised Serious and Organised Crime Agency 6 months ago, is under attack because Mr Kayonga was then apparently able to leave the country despite the address where he was allegedly staying in London being passed to the British authorities. Lawyers say they want an explanation from the NCA for why the chance for a Pinochet-style arrest, similar to the capture of the former Chilean dictator in 1998, had seemingly been missed. It was announced 2 weeks ago that Mr Kayonga is to become Rwanda's new ambassador to China. World at 8, talk about an organisation which is all mouth and trousers. Let this bastard have his treatment in China. Why over here? Hip-hop jihadist who left £1 million London home to fight in Syria complains on Twitter of being kidnapped, tortured and robbed by fellow Islamists. A British rapper who joined rebels fighting the Syrian regime has claimed he was kidnapped, tortured and robbed by members of rival Islamic terror groups. Abdel Majed Abdel Barry, 23, walked out of his family's £1 million home in Maida Vale, West London, last year to join militant groups, telling them he was leaving everything for the sake of Allah. Now Barry, whose music has featured on BBC Radio 1, has posted on Twitter that he and another Briton were abducted and robbed with their money, phones and guns stolen by other jihadists. World at 8, good. He shouldn't be allowed back here and his family should all be deported for treason by association. European news. Obama and Ukraine's democratically elected leaders. March the 6th, President Obama said in Washington that the Crimean authorities' plans for a referendum violate the Ukrainian constitution and violate international law. Any discussion about the future of Ukraine must include the legitimate government of Ukraine. We are well beyond the days when borders can be redrawn over the heads of democratically elected leaders, he added. Crimea is Ukraine, Secretary of State John Kerry said in Rome on the same day. Lest we forget, on February the 21st, President Viktor Yanukovych and 3 Ukrainian parliamentary party leaders signed a reconciliation agreement co-signed by foreign ministers of France, Germany and Poland, implying that their countries and the EU guaranteed the deal, and approved by a Russian representative. The document provided for constitutional reform, reducing presidential powers, the creation of a government of national unity, early presidential election and the disbandment of maiden armed forces. Far from disbanding, within hours those same armed factions forced Yanukovych to flee Kiev and stage-managed a parliamentary vote worthy of the proceedings of a Supreme Soviet circa 1937, which ushered in the Pushist regime. As Russia's President Vladimir Putin said on March 4th, Yanukovych had in fact given up his power already, and as I told him, he had no chance of being re-elected. What was the purpose of all those illegal, unconstitutional actions? Why did they have to create this chaos in the country? Armed and masked militants are still roaming the streets of Kiev. This is a question to which there is no answer. Well, there is one, and he knows it. As a BBC commentator pointed out on March the 5th, what makes Putin mad is the feeling that he is being deceived. Spain to give $500 to immigrants to return home. Spain's Interior Ministry will give $500 to every undocumented immigrant that agrees to go back to their country of origin. The initiative, which was used last year for 246 immigrants, has received funding to continue in 2014. Some €400,000 have been allocated for the 2-year period. Ministerial sources quoted by the media said that it is an attempt to stem the tide of undocumented emigration, which renders Spain vulnerable in its Moroccan enclaves Ceuta and Melilla. The same sources said that the initiative is in line with similar programmes run by countries such as Belgium, Switzerland and the Netherlands, and that it is being implemented in collaboration with Morocco. The sources claim that in giving immigrants €500 means making them better able to deal with life in their countries of origin, where pro capita income is very low. World at 8. They take the money and come back in again. One black migrant looks very much like another. 8 further jihadi arrests in France, following jailing of 4 on Monday. Prosecutors say 7 men and a woman have been arrested in France on suspicion of planning to join radical Islamic groups fighting in Syria. The prosecutor's office says French intelligence agents are questioning the 8 Tuesday, one day after their arrests in and around Paris. In France, terror suspects can be held up for 4 days before being charged or freed. More than 20 French citizens have been killed in Syria's 3-year-old civil war. In November, France opened an investigation into more than 600 French people who are either preparing to join the fighting or who are already there. World news. Moroccan woman gets 10 years in jail for killing her rapist. A Moroccan court jailed a woman for 10 years for killing a man who had repeatedly raped her, local media reported on Friday. The 34-year-old woman, known as Fatima, said she had sought help and reported the attacks to local authorities but was faced with indifference. "He killed me 1,000 times before I killed him too," local media quoted the woman as saying. In court in the northern city of Fez, Fatima told judges how she killed her rapist with an axe, disfigured him and dumped his body in a river. World at 8. Lucky she was in Morocco and not Saudi. She would have been stoned to death. 42 African refugees drown off Yemeni coast. About 42 African refugees drowned on Sunday evening off the Yemeni coast after their boat capsized in the Gulf of Aden, while about 30 people on the boat were rescued, the Yemeni Defence Ministry said in a statement. The accident took place a few kilometres away off the coast of Bir Ali coast of Yemen's southern province of Shabwa on Sunday evening, according to a statement that is posted on the ministry's website. World at 8. So the Yemenis clearly don't run about rescuing Africans in boats, do they? However, they do allow pirate and worse activities in those waters. Ma'alula nuns freed in exchange for 150 rebels held prisoner. The group of Orthodox nuns kidnapped last December in Ma'alula were released last week after President Assad released 153 rebels held as prisoners. The 13 nuns and 3 of their assistants were received by a convoy of cars that had arrived in Raha in Syria from Arsal in the Bekaa district of Lebanon. A Lebanese security convoy headed by Security Chief General Abbas Ibrahim waited on the Syrian border for hours for the go-ahead to collect the nuns. According to Lebanese media sources, the kidnappers had second thoughts, but in the end the sisters were brought to safety. It is assumed, but not certain, that they were brought to Damascus. Thought for the day: what mass immigration has done for Britain. The free market to which our EU partners are fundamentally committed has turned out to have rather different and serious implications in the UK. The fundamental mistake was to expand the EU to include 100 million people with a standard of living about 1/4 of ours. Migration Watch UK. Now, Migration Watch is the most viable of the groups and quangos set up to monitor immigration into this country. Although they run on official figures, and as you all now know, misinformation is now a key proponent of keeping the sheeples not only quiet but ignorant. Migration Watch also says net immigration to the United Kingdom surged to 212,000 in the year ending September 2013, a significant increase from the 154,000 in the previous year, according to the latest official statistics. The new immigration data casts considerable doubt on a pledge by Prime Minister David Cameron to get net immigration, the difference between the number of people entering Britain and those leaving, down to the tens of thousands before the general election in May 2015. According to the latest Migration Statistic Quarterly Report, you try saying that, published by the Office for National Statistics on February 27th, some 532,000 people migrated to the UK in the year ending in September, up from the 497,000 people who arrived during the previous year, while 320,000 left the country, down from the 343,000 the previous year. The number of EU citizens arriving in the UK rose to 209,000, up from 149,000 the previous year, while the immigration of non-EU citizens was 244,000, down from the 269,000 the previous year. Most of the immigrants to the UK were from the EU were from the economically troubled countries including Bulgaria, Italy, Poland, Portugal, Romania and Spain. Most of those arriving from non-EU countries were immigrants from Africa, Asia and the Middle East. Now, of course, these official figures do not include the illegals, the foreign prisoners in HM prison system, the relations brought in for dependency on benefits including children, potential marriage partners, students and businessmen. None of these are included, and neither are the thousands, if not millions, who spend their lives divided between the UK and their land of birth. Even the morons who continue to say that immigration benefits the UK cannot deny the tremendous effect that it has had on everyday life, especially in our large towns and cities. You compare London today with London of even 30 years ago and the differences are marked and terrible. We haven't yet reached the height of Marseille in southern France, but then that has always been fairly mixed as a Mediterranean port town, but now resembles Iraq on a particularly bad day and is almost constantly under a form of martial law, with gun-toting French troops trying to keep the peace, not only between the different Islamic factions, but the poor bloody French who still live there. A sight which we do not want to see in London. And of course, as we don't want to see the result of massive immigration into this country, all nationalists are classed as racist bastards. Well, I wear this racist bastard badge like a badge of honour. I have worked for it and I deserve it, and I will wear it with pride. Now, while we in the UK, and to some extent our larger neighbours on the continent, are suffering the effects of what is an Islamic invasion, bolstered out by the Africans and others converting at a rate of knots to what they see as an all-inclusive religion, but which does in fact exclude all who are not of Islamic persuasion, what are other countries doing to avoid our fate? Well, as I've said before, all the countries which send their effluents over to Europe and us are non-immigration countries. Now, many of them you wouldn't want to go to anyway. I wouldn't fancy my chances in Beijing of setting up a British National Party office, let alone settling down, but to each their own. And in these few short words, that is in effect what they say to the world. To each their own peoples, and these countries stick like glue to paper in administering their rights to keep their borders tightly shut. And at no time has the question of quid pro quo ever been raised at the UN or the EU. Just why are some countries allowed closed borders and apparently the UK and the rest of Europe are not? It cannot be about the European Union, as a great many migrants are from outside the EU, Africa, India, the Middle East and the Far East, and most have to pass through the so-called Schengen area to get all the way up to us in the UK. And yet India in particular has stringent laws preventing any non-Indian from buying or owning property or businesses in that country. But they do have a wonderfully adaptive law for Indian residents overseas, called NRI, or Non-Resident Indians, whereupon these people can claim asylum or simply get here and at the same time send all their monies, whether it be from our benefit system or monies made from their UK businesses, back to India, and own and moreover live in those properties in India without any trouble. So most, if not all Indian citizens, even if they have British passports, can live and own property and businesses in two countries. And indeed many of our so-called wealthy Asian businessmen live in India part of the year and the UK the other part, thus enabling them to escape or reduce British taxes. They have almost the same thing in Pakistan under Islamic laws as well. Many of our British-born Pakistanis have been going home for marriages and holidays for the last 40 odd years, many of whom also own extensive property back in their homeland. In Australia, they've started a Foreign Investment Review Board in which proposed foreign ownership of businesses or property in Australia are reviewed and administered, a necessary move because of the extensive buying up of land from the Chinese mainland. And remember, something which pushed Hitler to war was the need for Lebensraum or living room for the Aryan peoples. This needs to be remembered by our UK establishment. We are a small island, and yet we are almost all foreign owned. Our public services, our large corporations, our high streets and even our education facilities are all becoming foreign owned or foreign run. Why should this island, our island, be sold on the open market in the most invidious and devious way possible? By encouraging immigration from countries that do not reciprocate in any way with European investments or ownership in their land, we are fast becoming a foreign country within a country. When all the vast countries of the world, Africa, Arabia, India, China, Pakistan and many others close their borders to Europeans, and yet we, little England, are made the dumping pit and experimental forum for the masses of ethnics already in our midst, and any form of laws we might undertake for self-preservation will be stamped on from a great height as being racist or non-humanitarian. In Switzerland, the Lex Koller legislation limits how foreigners can buy property in Switzerland, and owning property does not give a person the right to a Swiss residence permit. Permits and authorisation for buying property are handled at the cantonal level. You see, we are virtually alone, even in the EU, for the way in which our various governments have sold us off to the highest bidders, and the laughable thing is that along with those deeds, they are still sending billions of pounds to many of these countries which have non-immigration policies enforced. Tell me, just how stupid is that? A report entitled State of the Nation, Where is Bittersweet Britain Heading, shows that 1 in 3 Britons believes that tensions between immigrants and people born in Britain is the primary cause of conflict in the country, and well over half regard it as one of the top 3 causes. The report also shows that a high proportion of British voters are pessimistic about the British economy, 50%, and 3/4 believe that there is a severe housing shortage due in large measure to uncontrolled immigration. More than half, 56%, say the current economic crisis will leave Britain weaker for years to come, and nearly half, 46%, say Britain is heading in the wrong direction. Now, property prices, especially in London, have risen and are still rising because of our foreign free buy policies. Wealthy non-ethnic Londoners are being forced out to suburbs or the country and shoving up the prices out there. All wonderful, we say, sitting in our ever-accumulating boxes, but it means that our young will have virtually no chance at all of getting on the property ladder in any area within travelling distance of London, work or pleasure. The buy-to-let market is almost exclusively Asian in many areas, with the resulting slums and lack of upkeep, and another slum landlord scenario is on its way. But of course the media will go easy on the Asians, in fact much easier than the treatment Peter Ackman received at the hands of the public. Because of course it was in the days when landlords had the right to put a sign in their windows: no Jews, no children, no blacks, no Irish and no pets considered. And those were the days, my friend. I thought they would never end. It is time our laws were amended, and without any input from either the EU or the UN. Unless we close these open territory laws and open foreign ownership laws, we are lost. It's no good to say that we are encouraging investment when it is plain we are not. Investment is stocks and shares in a corporation, land or business, not total ownership of the same. It is not receiving millions of pounds in bribes from the Saudis or the Qataris. That is not investment. It is financial bondage for the future. Diversity is not the same as having thousands of foreign-owned properties, land and businesses that divide the country and on which you cannot rely on. Multiculturalism is a range of services given by a small range of people in a small country, not overkill and overpopulation by the same. Good for the country is not replacing English workers with foreign workers into infinity. It is not making sure that English workers do not get trained. It is not giving foreigners certain jobs in certain places because they will be with their fellow countrymen. But it is closing down our borders and rethinking on a grand scale how or why or indeed if we should ever sell any property or business that operates in England to anyone who operates outside England in the future. Even to a sheeple, the picture of this country now is ghastly. The black and Asian faces at our sales, the riots of these self-same people unreported but every day, the not so gradual takeover of our services and the almost wicked denigration of our own method of providing for only ourselves in times past. That is our farms, fisheries, manufacturing, shops and much more. There have had to be massive adjustments made to feed all these newcomers, and soon it will be them or us, and no amount of community largesse will counter it. A prime example of building for the immigrants' future is the HS2. It will destroy an important part of our countryside. The Brits cannot afford to use it, and soon, with the absence of jobs and industry, won't need to do so. So why is it being built? It's being built for troop movements from the EU, that's what. So that when the balloon goes up, which, if certain laws are not brought into being, it will, EU troops will be able to traverse the country with ease. That is why our own armed forces are being decimated and our police force have now become Big Brother. Due to British stupidity and generosity in one breath, England can become a police state. Muslims and ethnics in the main cities, holding on to the prime businesses and property and what remains of us in little boxes in certain areas well controlled. Now, if this is what you want, fine, but I personally don't, and I will fight it every inch of the way by any means I can. We need to adopt the stance of other countries who accused us of colonialism, close our borders, stop future foreign investors, fine and tax the existing ones, stop halal and start deportations of criminal and illegal aliens. This is a lovely blog from the Daily Telegraph and I quote, "Only citizens should vote, non-citizens should not. Being born or having a child does not a citizen make. You need to be born in that country with a citizen parent, one or two will do, or abroad with two citizens. If you're not a citizen or have a right of abode and have lost it, you can be deported. Living here does not allow relatives to come. Retroactive citizenship law can and should be tidied up at least back to 1945. We are the only country in the world that has given up the right to vote to foreigners. How can one expect to run a country the British way if half the sodding voters are foreign? I'm sure Boris the Loris can answer that one for me. If a country or its people do not stand up for themselves, then what is there to fight or vote for? And finally, garden snakes can be dangerous. Green tree snakes, Dendrolaphis punctulata, can be dangerous. Yes, tree snakes or grass snakes, not brown snakes or taipans, and here is why. A couple in Townsville had a lot of potted plants. During a recent cold winter, for Townsville that is, the wife was bringing some of the valued tender ones indoors to protect them from the cold at night. It turned out that a little green tree snake was hidden in one of the plants. When it warmed up it slithered out and the wife saw it go under the lounge. She let out a very loud scream. The husband, who was taking a shower, ran out to the living room naked to see what the problem was. She told him there was a snake in the lounge. He got down on the floor with his hands to look for it. About that time the family dog came and cold-nosed him on the behind. He thought the snake had bitten him, so he screamed and fell over on the floor. His wife thought he'd had a heart attack, so she covered him up, told him to lie still and called an ambulance. The paramedics rushed in, would not listen to his protests, loaded him on the stretcher and started carrying him out. About that time the snake came out from under the lounge and the paramedics saw it and dropped the end of his stretcher. That's when the man broke his leg and why he is still in hospital. The wife still had the problem with the snake in the house, so she called on a neighbour who volunteered to capture the snake. He armed himself with a rolled up newspaper and began poking under the sofa. Soon he decided it was gone and told the woman, who sat down on the sofa in relief. But while relaxing, her hand dangled in between the cushions where she felt the snake wriggling around. She screamed and fainted. The snake rushed back into the sofa. The neighbour, seeing her lying there passed out, tried to use CPR to revive her. The neighbour's wife, who had just returned from shopping at Woolies, saw her husband's mouth on the woman's mouth and slammed her husband in the back of the head with a bag of canned goods, knocking him out and cutting his scalp to a point where it needed stitches. The noise woke the woman from her dead faint and she saw her neighbour lying on the floor with his wife bending over him. So she assumed the snake had bitten him. She went to the kitchen, got a small bottle of whiskey and began pouring it down the man's throat. By now the police had arrived. They saw the unconscious man, smelt the whiskey and assumed that a drunken fight had occurred. They were about to arrest them all when the woman tried to explain how it all happened over a little garden snake. The police called an ambulance which took away the neighbour and his sobbing wife. Now the little snake again crawled out from under the sofa and one of the policemen drew his gun and fired at it. He missed the snake and hit the leg of the end table. The table fell over, the lamp on it shattered, and as the bulb broke it started to fire on the curtains. The other policeman tried to beat out the flames and fell through the window into the yard on top of the family dog, who, startled, jumped out and raced into the street, where an oncoming car swerved to avoid it and smashed into the parked police car. Meanwhile, neighbours saw the burning curtains and called in the fire brigade. The firemen had started raising the fire ladder when they were halfway down the street. The rising ladder tore out the overhead wires, pulled out the power and disconnected the telephones in a 10-square city block area, although they did get the house fire out. Time passed. The snake was caught and both men were discharged from the hospital. The house was repaired, the dog came home, the police acquired a new car and all was right with their world. A while later they were watching TV and the weatherman announced a cold snap for that night. The wife asked her husband if he thought they should bring in their plants for the night. And that's when he shot her. You've been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynn Mozar and I wish you all a very good night. To receive treatment for cancer. The NCA, which took over from the heavily criticised Serious and Organised Crime Agency 6 months ago, is under attack because Mr Kayonga was then apparently able to leave the country despite the address where he was allegedly staying in London being passed to the British authorities. Lawyers say they want an explanation from the NCA for why the chance for a Pinochet-style arrest, similar to the capture of the former Chilean dictator in 1998, had seemingly been missed. It was announced 2 weeks ago that Mr Kayonga is to become Rwanda's new ambassador to China. World at 8, talk about an organisation which is all mouth and trousers. Let this bastard have his treatment in China. Why over here? Hip-hop jihadist who left £1 million London home to fight in Syria complains on Twitter of being kidnapped, tortured and robbed by fellow Islamists, where staff are accustomed to ending work early and going to the pub instead. One employee said, "They're utterly chaotic. I was horrified by them. There's an element of the 70s golf club." Charles Kayonga in Britain. UK crime agency failed to act on arrest warrant for Rwandan general. The National Crime Agency, NCA, the newly founded police body dubbed Britain's FBI, stands accused of failing to act on an arrest warrant for a former Rwandan general wanted for crimes against humanity while he was in London receiving medical treatment. Lawyers acting for the victims of atrocities and war crimes alleged to have been committed by Charles Kayonga during Rwanda's 1994 genocide served a European arrest warrant, EAW, on the NCA via a Spanish judge in January after receiving information that he was in the capital while staff regularly take their clothes off and compile lists of people they would like to have sex with. Nigel Farage's wife, who works as a secretary for UKIP, has reportedly described the office, which the party moved into last year as part of its push to become a major political force, as a freak show. The revelations about the bizarre atmosphere inside the headquarters were revealed after the Times spoke to a number of people who have worked in the building, which is located behind Claridge's Hotel. The office, which was lent to UKIP by wealthy backer Andrew Reid, is the centre of the party's push to beat the mainstream parties in this year's European elections and to win its first MPs in the general election of 2015. However, the insider accounts suggest that the new headquarters have failed to bring about a more professional approach, with one worker describing the atmosphere as carry-on politics.
You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Wednesday, 12th of March 2014. Inside the UKIP zoo, where staff regularly take their clothes off. Charles Kayonga in Britain, UK crime agency failed to act on arrest warrant for Rwandan general. Hip-hop jihadist who left £1 million London home to fight in Syria complains on Twitter of being kidnapped, tortured and robbed by fellow Islamists. Obama and Ukraine's democratically elected leaders. Spain to give $500 to immigrants to return home. 8 further jihadi arrests in France following jail of 4 on Monday. Moroccan woman gets 10 years in jail for killing her rapist. 42 African refugees drown off Yemeni coast. Ma'alula nuns freed in exchange for 150 rebels held prisoner. Thought for the day, mass immigration leaves towns and cities unrecognisable. And finally, garden snakes can be dangerous. UK news. Inside the UKIP zoo, where staff regularly take their clothes off. UKIP's new London headquarters is a chaotic environment where workers are sex obsessed and volunteers frequently leave work early to go to the pub, it was claimed today. Former employees say that their office in Mayfair is often full of workers' pets,